Chapter 2. It is highly probable that with the noise as of thunder there will issue from certain sources the condemnation that the system indicated in this work as magic has sole reference to that principle in the constitution of man which pertains exclusively to the lower nature. In consequence this classification, it is not difficult to anticipate that the whole theurgic technique will be roundly condemned as psychism. In, for example, theosophical circles, as matter of fact, as but little study need demonstrate, the condemnation is misplaced and totally unjustified. To correct this view for all time is the Tree of Life issued to the reading public. I loathe this theosophical glibness of expression. I must be permitted to register a hatred of their too facile classification, their perpetual readiness to apply labels of scathing opprobrium to things not altogether understood. Were it not that I feel so deeply concerning magic, holding that it may be found the means to storm the kingdom of heaven by violence, this theosophical abuse and intended censure would be deservedly ignored and relegated to that sphere of contempt to which it so rightly belongs. There has been altogether too much misunderstanding of what magic is and what it sets out to do, and it is time to clear up once and for all this constant source of confusion by laying down the elementary principles of its art. In her renowned stanzas of Zion, upon which the entire secret doctrine is arranged as commentary, Madame Blavatsky informs us that each man is a shadow or a spark of a divinity of superlative wisdom, power, and spirituality. These sentient beings are called one of the theurgic authorities, gods or universal essences. A present-day theosophical authority, Dr. Gottfried de Perucker, writes, "The finest part of the constitution of the human being is to ease each a child of the spiritual part of one or another of the glorious suns scattered through the frontierless space." Ye are gods in your innermost parts, atoms of spiritual sun. End quote. The definition accorded a god in the secret doctrine is of an hierarchical being which in remotest epochs of evolutionary endeavour long ago was once a human being such as we are now. By dint of effort and conscious progress it unified itself with that spiritual reality diffused throughout the ramifications and foundations of the universe. At the time of union, however, the essential individuality of experience was retained, but the personality transcended, the being resumed its natural role of ruler, as it were, or regent of the universe, or some particular portion or aspect of the universe. Since, therefore, by this definition, man is the spark of so lofty a consciousness, a child of the cosmic gods, there is no alternative to the tenor of his life than that to his spiritual progenitors he should aspire for union. It is to effect this union that magic owes its origin and its raison d'etre. Within these pages, I hope to show that the technique of magic is in closest accord with the traditions of the highest antiquity, and that it possesses the sanction expressed or implicit of the best authorities. Iamblichus, the divine theurgist, has much to say in his various writings about magic. Likewise, Proclus and Porphyry, and even in modern authoritative theosophical literature, there are obscure references, though unexplained and never enlarged upon, to the divine magic. Several fine invocations from Gnostic records and various recessions of the Book of the Dead will be presented toward the close of the book, and disquisitions based upon Egyptian and Kabbalistic magical conceptions will be found in other of these chapters. Any casual summary of magic, then, in a single word, psychism, is utterly absurd, to say the least. I know theosophists, however, and realize the necessity of anticipating their objections with a comprehensive counter. The magician must be in control of the whole of his nature. Every constituent element of his being must be developed under will to the topmost pitch of perfection. No one principle must be repressed. Each is an aspect of the Supreme Spirit and must fulfill its own purpose and nature. If the theurgist engages, for instance, in astral travelling, to which part of the great work theosophical objection will in the main be levelled, it is so for three principal reasons. First, that in the so-called astral light he may perceive an exact reflection of himself in all his several parts and qualities and attributions, an examination of that reflection tending naturally to a species of self-knowledge. Second, the definition of the astral light from the magical point of view is an exceedingly broad one, including all subtle planes above or within the physical, and it is the objective of the magician constantly to rise to the more fiery and lucid realms of the spiritual world. The grosser elements of the sphere of Azoth, with its sensuous images and clouded opaque visions, must ever be transcended and left far behind. Eliphas Levi goes so far as to make, for practical purposes, but two major plane divisions in the universe, the physical world and the spiritual world. Third, before this particular portion of the invisible world can be transcended, it must be conquered and mastered in each of its own aspects. All the denizens of the sphere must be made to submit to the magician, to his magical symbols, and to obey unequivocally the reality of royal will, which these latter symbolize. On our plane and in our wake-a-day realm of ordinary experience, symbols are merely arbitrary representations of an inner intelligible significance. They are the visible signatures of a metaphysical or a spiritual grace, as it were. In the astral light, however, these symbols assume independent existence, revealing their tangible reality, and hence they are of the utmost importance. Evocations are undertaken by the magician not out of curiosity nor to satisfy a thirst for power, but with the sole object of bringing these hidden facets of his own consciousness within the scope of his will, and thus subjecting them to his domination. Psychism may perhaps be defined as having for its object the stimulation and preservation of the lower self at the expense or ignorance of the higher self. This is an abomination deserving of the severest censure. In magic, no attempt is made to acquire powers for their own sake, or for any base or nefarious purpose. Any power acquired must instantly be subordinated to the will and kept in its own place and proper perspective. This question of powers is a most curious one, I might add, obtaining major prominence in the public eye only since the advent of the cult of spiritualism and formation of theosophical organizations. Why individuals, particularly some theosophists, should lust after or contemplate as they do astral or other occult powers for their own sake is a pathological morbidity, and as such is a thing which surpasses my comprehension. At the commencement of his career, the magician is obliged to comprehend that this one aspiration is to his higher self, to his holy guardian angel, and that any faculties which are obtained must be harnessed to that aspiration. Any lesser work undertaken must be with a definite spiritual motive. An aspiration to anything other than the holy guardian angel constitutes in reality, and with but few exceptions, an act of black magic, which is therefore to the last degree abhorrent. It must be obvious, then, to all that psychism as the desire for abnormal psychic powers to serve as an end in themselves is quite foreign to the intent and purpose of this technique. Another objection likely to be raised is that magic may lead to mediumship. Now, this is also an erroneous censure for a large number of reasons. It has been correctly observed that both the medium and the magician cultivate trance. But there the accuracy of the observation ceases, for in the respective states of consciousness there is all the difference in the world. In popular parlance there is the hackneyed expression that genius and madness are allied. The real distinction is that the one case, the balance of gravity, is above the normal centre of consciousness. In the latter it is below, and waking consciousness has become invaded by the inchoate horde of uncontrolled subconscious impulses. The same idea applies, with even greater force, to the comparison of medium and magician. For the medium cultivates a passive and negative trance which hurls her centre of consciousness below into that what we may call the nefesh. The magician, on the other hand, is intensely active from both the mental and spiritual point of view, and though he too strives in noetic trance to hold the radiosynthetive processes in abeyance, his method is to rise above them, to open himself up to the telestic rays of the higher self, rather than to descend haphazard into the relative slime of the nefesh. This constitutes the sole difference. The cultivation of the magical will and the consequent exaltation of the soul is the technique of magic. The spiritualistic trance is nothing more or less than an unnatural descent into inertia and the animal consciousness. All human and divinity is abdicated in the passive negative trance for the substitution of animal life and a demoniac obsession. The abdication of the rational ego in the magician takes place in favour of a noetic spiritual attainment, not the torpor of instinctive and vegetative life. Magic, therefore, has no association from any possible point of view with passive mediumship. Before proceeding to the exposition of the fundamental principles of magic, it is necessary to make clear my position so far as concerns the sources of theoretical philosophy underlying my personal interpretation of its technique. It will be fairly obvious that I am deeply obligated to theosophy. Many of the magical practices have their basis in the practical Kabbalah of the Hebrew philosophers and the sacerdotal theurgy of the Egyptians. Fragments have been culled from several sources, and to a great number of thinkers both before me and in my time am I greatly indebted, and these I gladly acknowledge. As regards theosophy, I think it only honest to confess, despite derogatory remarks registered against the behaviour of individual theosophists, that for Blavatsky I have nothing but the highest admiration and respect. Much of the philosophical superstructure revealed in the secret doctrine commands but mute acquiescence and cordial agreement. My own conception of the magical philosophy owes what little of which is consistent and clear to the developments in comparative religion and philosophy with which Blavatsky has provided me. Yet my attitude is one of eclecticism, choosing here, rejecting there, and forming of the whole a coherent and consistent synthesis pleasing to the mind and satisfying to the soul. The entirety of Blavatsky's teaching is one which, in various of its ramifications, I feel I cannot accept. There is much with which I am wholly in sympathy, which one would be proud and happy to assimilate into personal philosophy, and at the same time there is much which is displeasing and repugnant to the inner sense. To the works of Arthur Edward Waite, in particular reference to his summaries of Kabbalistic teachings, I am also in no little degree indebted. There is a considerable quantity of fine literature written by now aged contemporary, which is exceedingly graceful, informative, and sublime, singing at times with incomparable eloquence. And it is this aspect of excellent scholarship and lyricism which I think should not be forgotten, marred though it sometimes may appear to be by the frequency of passages in his writing which elicit justifiable censure. There are of abysmal turgidity and pomposity, and exhibit an unnecessary tendency to destructive criticism. But I, so far as personal feeling is concerned, have a warm place in my inner heart for Mr. Waite, and I owe far more than mere words can tell, and as a supplement to present study would enthusiastically recommend to every reader his Secret Doctrine in Israel and the Holy Kabbalah. Although the works of the eminent French magus, whose pseudonym was Eliphas Levi Zahed, there is much meaningless drivel bearing not the least relation to magic. Yet one perceives here and there in Dogme et Rituel de la Haute Magie, in his own works, gleaming like stars in the bowl of the firmament, bright nuggets of purest gold in the dark ore of obscurity and triviality. I must confess, however, to being quite unimpressed in every way by his own record of his capabilities as a practical magician, since for one thing his so-called evocation of the shade of Apollonius of Tyana eventuated in a complete paucity of result. He is a difficult problem for most readers. In addition, he has burdened himself with a confusion or silly attempt to reconcile magic with Roman Catholicism, without therefore a firm grasp of the fundamental principles of the Kabbalah and comparative philosophy. The student will be bound to be hurled headlong into several pits, which he provides for the unwary. S. L. McGregor Mathers and W. Wynne Westcott have also provided me with much to serve as fundamental in this magical philosophy, particularly the former, and much useful material may be gathered from the works of them both. The world must ever be grateful for Mathers for his translations of The Secret Magic of Abramelin the Mage and the Introduction to the Study of the Kabbalah. By Westcott is perhaps one of the most sympathetic of all the elementary treatises on the subject. To accept, however, the entire views of these writers is to receive acute mental indigestion. In each one there are several elements of truth, at least truth for the individual student, and lurking at the bottom there is a slight residuum of exaggeration, misunderstanding, or error. It will be noted, too, that I have quoted frequently from Aleister Crowley, and it is imperative clearly to define my attitude towards this man of genius. Ignoring the opprobrium of black magic held by many individuals who are completely unaware of what he taught, there is much which is important in Crowley, a great deal of philosophy and original thought on both the Kabbalah and magic, beautifully expressed in prose and verse, and profound in conception. It is a pity, as I see it, that the public should be robbed of that superlative freshness and originality which are his, and deprived of those aspects of his teachings that are fine, ennobling, and enduring, simply because of a certain proportion of his literary output, which is certainly banal, petty, unimportant, and no doubt very reprehensible. The personalities and private lives of these individuals concern me not at all, and I do not feel inclined to discuss them. Nearly all of them have at some point or other suffered the stings and arrows of misjudgment from a leering crowd. With that crowd, and with the nature of the invectives hurled, I also have nothing to do, for magic is not for them in any way. On each student, therefore, is the task incumbent to ascertain for himself what must be considered true and reliable, and set up his own score of incontrovertible standards of reference, and this standard must be spiritual experience. For this reason has the Kabbalistic tree of life been adopted as the framework of practical magic, since it is in the first place open to synthetic and constructive classification, and because it provides what may suitably be called a magical alphabet. It must be noted that the word alphabet is used, and it is used in preference to language and the developments therefrom. The Kabbalah does not attempt to provide a complete magical language or an entire philosophy. Only by spiritual experience may the latter be acquired, but from the alphabet of ideas, numbers, and symbols, and the intimations which it presents, the student may find himself enabled, with the aid of magical research, to construct a satisfactory edifice of high philosophy which will take him through life.